Korean Mafia boss said to the black woman, "No man wants a woman like you." She became his greatest regret. Rain fell heavily over Seoul that night. The city glittered beneath neon lights, its towering buildings glowing through the mist like silent giants watching over the restless streets. Taxis splashed through puddles, and crowds rushed along sidewalks trying to escape the cold rain. But in the center of the city stood a building where the storm outside meant nothing. The Dragon Crown Casino. Luxury cars lined the entrance. Valets hurried beneath large black umbrellas while wealthy businessmen, celebrities, and powerful figures stepped inside. But hidden beyond the dazzling casino floor, past the rows of roulette tables and poker rooms, past security doors that required special clearance, there was a private VIP lounge. And inside that room sat the man who controlled much more than a casino. His name was Kang Min-jae. To the public, he was a mysterious billionaire investor. To the police, he was an untouchable ghost connected to half the underground dealings in Seoul. But to the people who worked for him, he was something far more dangerous. He was the boss. Kang Min-jae leaned back in a leather chair, casually swirling a glass of expensive whiskey in his hand. The dim lighting of the room reflected in the glass table in front of him. Around him stood several men in dark suits, his security team. Silent. Watchful. No one spoke unless Min-jae spoke first. Across the room, the door opened. A young assistant stepped inside nervously. "Sir, the woman you scheduled to meet is here." Min-jae didn't even look up. "Send her in." The assistant nodded quickly and disappeared. A moment later, the door opened again, and she walked in. Her name was Amara Johnson. She was tall, confident, and composed, dressed in a simple but elegant dark blazer. Raindrops still clung to the ends of her braided hair from the storm outside. Her dark skin glowed under the soft lights of the room. She carried a laptop bag and a folder of documents. The guards in the room exchanged glances. One of them raised an eyebrow slightly. They clearly weren't expecting her. Amara walked forward calmly and stopped across the table from Kang Min-jae. For the first time, he looked up. His sharp eyes studied her from head to toe. Not warmly, not politely, but with the cold evaluation of a man used to judging people within seconds.
"Sit," he said.
His voice was low and controlled. Amara sat down across from him. "Thank you for meeting with me, Mr. Kang." Min-jae said nothing. He simply leaned back in his chair, clearly uninterested. Amara opened her laptop. "I'll get straight to the point. I've developed a next-generation security system using artificial intelligence. It predicts threats before they happen." One of the guards snorted quietly. Amara ignored him and continued. "My system can monitor large facilities, detect unusual patterns, and prevent breaches before security teams even notice the risk." She turned the laptop screen slightly so Min-jae could see. Graphs appeared. Simulations. Data models. This technology could protect high-value businesses like casinos, banks, and international assets. Min-jae glanced at the screen for less than 2 seconds. Then he leaned back again. Unimpressed. Amara continued explaining the algorithm, the predictive modeling, and how her system could prevent millions in losses. But she slowly noticed something. He wasn't listening. Min-jae was staring at his whiskey glass. Finally, she finished her presentation. Silence filled the room. She waited. Min-jae lifted his glass and took a slow sip. Then he chuckled. Not a friendly laugh. A mocking one. The guards in the room smirked. Min-jae finally looked at her again. "Let me ask you something." Amara remained calm. "Yes." He tilted his head slightly. "Do you really think people like me invest in things like this?" Amara held his gaze. "I believe smart people invest in the future." For a moment, the room grew very quiet. One of the guards raised his eyebrows at her boldness. Min-jae stared at her. Then suddenly,
he laughed.
This time louder. The guards joined in. Min-jae leaned forward on the table, his eyes sharp and cruel. "Let me give you some advice." Amara remained silent. His voice dropped to a cold whisper. "No man wants a woman like you." The words hung in the air like a slap. The guards chuckled again. One of them muttered under his breath. Why did she even come here? Another shook his head. But Amara didn't react the way they expected.
She didn't argue.
She didn't cry. She didn't defend herself. Instead, she slowly closed her laptop. The quiet click of the lid echoed in the silent room. She gathered her papers calmly and placed them back into her bag. Then she stood up. Min-jae watched her carefully, waiting, almost hoping for a reaction. But her face remained completely composed. Her voice was steady. Thank you for your time, Mr. Kong. No anger. No bitterness. Just professionalism. She turned and walked toward the door. The guards moved aside to let her pass. As the door closed behind her, Min-jae scoffed and took another sip of whiskey. To think she expected investment, he said dismissively. The men in the room laughed. But none of them noticed something strange. For just a brief second, before the door closed, Amara Johnson's eyes had changed. There was no humiliation in them, only determination. And outside, the rain kept falling over the streets of Seoul. But as Amara stepped into the storm, one quiet thought echoed in her mind. One day, they will remember this moment, and they will regret it. 3 years passed. In a city that never stopped moving, 3 years could change everything. Seoul had grown even brighter, louder, and richer. New skyscrapers pierced the sky, luxury cars filled the streets, and powerful businessmen fought silently for control of the city's money and influence. But above all of them, one man still sat comfortably at the top. Kang Min-jae. His empire had expanded far beyond the walls of the Dragon Crown Casino. He now owned multiple casinos across Asia, luxury hotels, shipping companies, and private investment firms that quietly controlled billions of dollars. On paper, he was one of the most successful businessmen in South Korea. Behind closed doors, he was still the same feared mafia boss. People rarely said his name out loud. And when they did, they lowered their voices. That morning, Kang Min-jae sat inside the top floor of his private office tower. The building overlooked the Han River, offering a breathtaking view of the entire city. Floor-to-ceiling windows filled the office with sunlight. A massive black marble desk sat in the center of the room. Min-jae sat behind it, reviewing financial reports while his advisors stood nearby. The room was quiet except for the soft sound of pages turning. One of his senior advisors, a man named Mr. Park, cleared his throat carefully. "Sir, there's something you should see." Min-jae didn't look up. "What is it?" Mr. Park hesitated before continuing. "There's a company that has been expanding very quickly across Asia's security industry." Min-jae signed a document without interest. "That's not our business." "It might become our problem," Mr. Park replied carefully. Now Min-jae looked up. Mr. Park stepped forward and placed a tablet on the desk. "This company has secured contracts with multiple banks, government buildings, tech corporations, and international investment firms." Min-jae glanced at the screen. "What company?" Mr. Park answered slowly. "Johnson Dynamics." For a brief moment, Min-jae said nothing. The name stirred something faint in his memory. He leaned back in his chair slightly. "Who owns it?" Mr. Park tapped the screen. A profile appeared. Photo. Biography. Company valuation. Min-jae's eyes narrowed. The woman on the screen looked familiar. Very familiar. Dark braided hair. Calm expression. Confident eyes. Then it hit him. Amara Johnson. The woman from the casino. The woman he had dismissed. The woman he had humiliated. Min-jae leaned forward slowly. "How much is the company worth?" Mr. Park swallowed slightly. "Estimated $8 billion. The room went silent. One of the other advisors looked shocked. "She started it only 3 years ago," another said quietly. Min-jae stared at the tablet screen. Images flashed across the display showing high-tech security systems, global offices, and headlines from international business magazines. Johnson Dynamics revolutionizes AI security systems. Tech entrepreneur Amara Johnson becomes one of the fastest-rising CEOs in the industry. Governments turn to Johnson Dynamics for next-generation threat detection. Min-jae felt something strange tighten in his chest. 3 years ago, she had sat across from him, with that same idea, that same technology. And he had barely listened. Instead,
He had laughed.
one of his advisors spoke cautiously. Sir, her company's technology predicts security breaches using artificial intelligence. Many corporations say it's more advanced than anything currently available. Mr. Park added, even some government agencies are using it now. Min Jae remained silent. His fingers tapped slowly on the desk. His mind drifted back to that rainy night, the quiet casino lounge, the laptop presentation, her calm voice explaining the system, and then his own voice. Cold, cruel. No man wants a woman like you. The memory suddenly felt heavier than it had before. Min Jae stood up and walked toward the giant windows overlooking Seoul. Cars moved like tiny streams below. The city he controlled. Or, at least, the city he believed he controlled. Behind him, one of the advisors continued speaking. Sir, Johnson Dynamics is becoming the global standard for private security technology. If they continue expanding at this rate, he hesitated, they may eventually control the entire market. Min Jae crossed his arms. For the first time in years, he felt something unexpected. Curiosity. Where is she now? He asked quietly.
Mr. Park checked the tablet.
She's scheduled to speak at the Global Technology Summit in Singapore next week. Min Jae turned slowly. His expression had changed. No longer dismissive. Now it was thoughtful. Calculating. Book a flight, he said. The advisors looked surprised. Sir, you're going personally? Min Jae picked up his coat. Yes. He glanced once more at the tablet screen showing Amara Johnson's photograph. The woman he had once dismissed as insignificant was now standing among the most powerful innovators in the world. A small smile appeared on Min Jae's face. But it wasn't the same mocking smile from 3 years ago. This one carried something different. Interest. Because Kang Min Jae had built his entire empire on one rule. Never underestimate power. And somehow, 3 years ago, he had made the rare mistake of doing exactly that. As he walked out of the office, one quiet thought crossed his mind. Perhaps it was time to see just how powerful Amara Johnson had become. And, deep down, a strange feeling followed him. A feeling he had not experienced in many years. The uneasy sense that he may have made a very expensive mistake. Singapore shimmered under the afternoon sun. Unlike the restless chaos of Seoul, this city felt precise, polished, almost futuristic. Glass skyscrapers reflected the blue sky like mirrors, and the streets below moved with calm efficiency. At the heart of the city stood one of the largest convention centers in Asia. And inside it, the Global Technology Summit was underway. Every year, the most powerful innovators, investors, and tech leaders from around the world gathered here to showcase the future. Artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, robotics, quantum computing. The building buzzed with excitement as journalists rushed between stages, cameras flashed, and entrepreneurs prepared to pitch ideas that could change the world. But this year, there was one speaker everyone had come to see. Backstage, assistants hurried around adjusting microphones and checking schedules. On a large digital screen near the stage entrance, the next speaker's name appeared. Amara Johnson, founder and CEO, Johnson Dynamics. Applause from the previous session faded as the lights dimmed slightly. Thousands of people filled the massive auditorium. Investors, government officials, tech journalists, and some of the most powerful business leaders in the world. A host stepped onto the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced with excitement, our next speaker is one of the fastest rising innovators in global security technology. The audience leaned forward. Her company has revolutionized predictive threat detection using artificial intelligence and advanced analytics. More cameras turned toward the stage. Please welcome Amara Johnson. The lights brightened, and she walked out. 3 years had changed her, but not in the way people might expect. She wasn't flashy. She wasn't arrogant. She wore a simple, elegant suit and walked with calm confidence, her posture straight and steady. But something about her presence commanded attention. The room fell silent as she approached the podium. She paused for a moment, looking out across the massive crowd. Thousands of faces. Watching. Waiting. Then she smiled slightly. "Good afternoon." Her voice was calm, clear, and powerful. 3 years ago, I started Johnson Dynamics with a simple belief. She paused. That security should not be about reacting to danger. The screen behind her lit up with data models and simulations. It should be about preventing it. Graphs appeared showing crime prevention models, predictive analytics, and AI threat detection patterns. The audience watched closely. Her presentation was sharp, confident, brilliant. "Our technology analyzes millions of behavioral patterns in real time," she explained. "It identifies threats before they happen, allowing security teams to stop incidents before they even begin." Images appeared of banks, airports, corporate buildings, and city surveillance networks protected by her system. "We are not creating tools to control people," she continued. "We are creating systems that protect dignity." Her words carried weight, passion, purpose. And by the time she finished speaking, the entire room was silent. For half a second, then the audience erupted. Applause thundered across the auditorium. People stood to their feet. Cameras flashed rapidly. Investors whispered excitedly. Journalists began typing headlines before the applause even ended. But far in the back of the room, a man sat quietly watching everything. Kong Min-jae. Unlike the others, he didn't clap.
He simply observed.
His dark eyes studied the woman on stage carefully. 3 years ago, she had walked out of his casino in silence. Now, she stood before the world as one of the most influential tech leaders alive. Min-jae crossed his arms slowly. Something about the moment felt strange. He had spent his entire life recognizing power, understanding it, controlling it, and right now, he could see it clearly. Amara Johnson had become powerful, not through fear, not through money, but through respect, the kind of power that was much harder to destroy. As the applause finally faded, Amara thanked the audience and stepped away from the podium. She walked backstage again while reporters rushed toward the exit doors hoping to catch her first. Meanwhile, inside the auditorium, powerful investors began whispering. "Her company is unstoppable. Johnson Dynamics is dominating the industry. We should have invested earlier." Min-jae stood up slowly. One of his bodyguards leaned toward him. "Boss, should we leave?" Min-jae shook his head.
No.
His eyes remained focused on the stage entrance, where Amara had disappeared. For the first time in 3 years. He paused. "I want to meet her again." The bodyguard looked surprised. Min-jae rarely waited for anyone. People waited for him. But today was different. Outside the auditorium, a line had already formed. Investors, tech leaders, government representatives, all hoping to speak with Amara Johnson. Min-jae walked toward the line calmly. The bodyguards exchanged confused looks but followed. When he reached the end of the line, several people recognized him immediately. Whispers spread quietly. "Is that Kong Min-jae? What is he doing here?" But Min-jae ignored them. For the first time in years, the feared Mafia boss simply waited. Minutes later, the door opened, and Amara stepped out into the hallway. Flash cameras exploded immediately. Reporters surrounded her. "Ms. Johnson, over here. How does it feel becoming one of the most powerful innovators in security technology? What's next for Johnson Dynamics?" She answered politely, smiling calmly. But then, her eyes shifted. They moved past the reporters, past the investors,
And stopped.
right at the end of the line, on Kong Min-jae. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Their eyes met. 3 years of silence hung between them. He expected anger, resentment, bitterness. But her face showed none of those things. Instead, her expression was completely neutral, polite, professional, as if she were looking at a stranger. And somehow, that felt worse, because it meant something far more painful. She had moved on, while Kong Min-jae had just realized the woman he once humiliated had become someone the entire world now respected. And for the first time in years, the most feared man in Seoul felt something unfamiliar inside his chest. Not anger, Not jealousy, but something far more uncomfortable: regret. The conference center in Singapore buzzed with excitement long after Amara Johnson's presentation ended. Clusters of investors gathered in small groups, discussing the revolutionary technology they had just seen. Journalists hurried down the hallways trying to secure interviews. Executives from major corporations checked their phones, already contacting their teams back home. Everyone wanted a piece of Johnson Dynamics. And everyone wanted to meet the woman behind it. Outside one of the private meeting rooms on the executive floor, security guards stood quietly by the doors. Inside, the noise of the conference felt distant. Amara Johnson stood by the large glass window overlooking the skyline of Singapore. The city stretched endlessly before her, shimmering towers, busy streets, and ships moving slowly across the distant harbor. Her assistant stood nearby holding a tablet. "You have 5 more meeting requests," the assistant said. Amara sighed lightly. "Investors?"
Yes.
2 venture funds, 1 government delegation, and 2 private equity firms. Amara thought for a moment. "Schedule them next week. I'm done for today." The assistant nodded and turned toward the door. But before she could leave, another security guard knocked gently. "Miss Johnson, there is 1 more person requesting a meeting." Amara raised an eyebrow. "I just said," he insisted. "Who is it?" The guard hesitated. "Kong Min-jae." The room went quiet. Amara didn't move. For a few seconds, she simply stared out the window again. 3 years. 3 years since that rainy night in Seoul. 3 years since she had walked out of the Dragon Crown Casino. 3 years since hearing those words that had cut deeper than she ever showed. "No man wants a woman like you." Her assistant watched her carefully. "Do you want me to decline?" Amara was silent for a moment. Then she turned slowly. "No," she said calmly. "Let him in." A few minutes later, the door opened again. Kong Min-jae stepped into the room. He looked exactly the same as she remembered.
Tall.
Sharp suit. Cold confidence in the way he carried himself. But his expression was slightly different now. Less dismissive. More measured. The door closed behind him, leaving the 2 of them alone. For a moment neither spoke. Min-jae studied her quietly. 3 years ago, he had barely looked at her presentation. Now he noticed everything. Her calm posture. Her steady eyes. The quiet authority she carried. Amara gestured toward a chair. "You can sit." Min-jae walked forward and sat across the conference table. He placed his hands together calmly. "I watched your presentation," he said. Amara nodded slightly. "I know. You've built something impressive. Thank you." Her voice remained polite, professional, but distant. Min-jae leaned forward slightly. "I'd like to invest in Johnson Dynamics." Amara looked at him for a moment. Then she gave a small, almost amused smile. "You're 3 years too late." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Min-jae didn't react immediately. Instead, he reached into his jacket and placed a card on the table. "I'm prepared to offer a significant investment." Amara didn't even glance at the card. "We're not looking for investors." "Everyone is looking for investors," he replied calmly. "Not anymore." She sat down across from him. "Our company is fully funded." Min-jae studied her carefully. "Then let's call it a partnership." Amara shook her head slightly.
No.
He leaned back in his chair. "Name your price." Her eyes met his directly. "I'm not for sale." The room fell silent. Outside the window, the Singapore skyline glowed in the afternoon sun. Min-jae felt something strange rising in his chest. 3 years ago, he had believed this woman needed him, needed his money, his influence, his approval. But now, the situation had reversed completely. She didn't need anything from him, and she knew it. He exhaled slowly. "You've done very well," he admitted. Amara folded her hands calmly. "I worked hard." Min-jae nodded. "I can see that." For the first time since entering the room, his tone softened slightly. "I underestimated you." Amara didn't answer. She simply watched him. Min-jae continued. "Your technology could reshape the entire security industry. That's the goal. And you built all of this without any major investors?" "Yes." Min-jae shook his head slowly. Impressive. There was another pause. Then he spoke again. You remember what I said to you 3 years ago? It wasn't a question. Amara's face remained calm. Yes. Min-jae looked down briefly, before meeting her eyes again. For a man known for his pride, what he said next surprised even himself. I shouldn't have said it. Silence settled between them. Amara didn't react immediately. She simply studied his face, trying to decide if the apology was real, or just another business tactic. Finally, she spoke. You didn't just say it, she replied quietly. You believed it. Min-jae didn't deny it. That made the moment heavier. After a few seconds, Amara stood up and walked back toward the window. She looked out over the city again. You know something interesting, she said. Min-jae waited. She turned slightly toward him. 3 years ago, I came to you because I needed someone powerful to believe in my idea. Her voice remained calm. But after that meeting, she paused. I decided I didn't need anyone's permission to succeed. Min-jae watched her quietly. For the first time in a very long time, he felt genuine regret. Not the kind people pretended to feel. Real regret. Because he now realized something important. 3 years ago, he hadn't just dismissed a woman. He had dismissed the future. And now the future was standing in front of him, completely beyond his reach. Amara walked back to the table and picked up a folder. I have another meeting soon, she said politely. Min-jae stood. He didn't argue, didn't push further. He simply nodded once. Congratulations, Ms. Johnson. Amara gave a small professional smile. Thank you, Mr. Kong. He turned and walked toward the door. But just before leaving, he paused. For the first time in his life, Kong Min-jae felt something unfamiliar pressing against his pride. A quiet voice in his mind whispered something he rarely experienced. You made a mistake. A very big one. And as the door closed behind him, Min-jae finally understood something he had never considered before. Some opportunities in life, once lost, never return. Back in Seoul, the city felt the same as always. The streets buzzed with traffic. Neon lights glowed through the night. Music echoed from crowded restaurants and luxury bars. But inside Kong Min-jae's world, something had quietly begun to change. 3 weeks had passed since the Global Technology Summit in Singapore. 3 weeks since he had spoken to Amara Johnson again. And 3 weeks since he realized something deeply uncomfortable. Her company was everywhere. Inside the top floor of Min-jae's headquarters, a long conference table was covered with reports, contracts, and digital projections displayed on a large screen. His advisors sat around the table. The mood was tense. Mr. Park adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. Sir, we have a problem. Min-jae leaned back in his chair. Explain. Mr. Park tapped the screen. A map of Asia appeared. Small glowing markers began lighting up across the countries.
Japan,
Singapore, South Korea, Thailand,
Dubai,
Europe, North America. These are facilities currently using Johnson Dynamics security systems. Min-jae stared at the growing list.
banks,
Financial exchanges, luxury hotels, private airports, even some government buildings. The red markers spread across the screen like wildfire. Mr. Park continued carefully. In the past 6 months, Johnson Dynamics has secured contracts with over 70% of high-value financial institutions in Asia. Another advisor spoke up. And their technology is becoming mandatory for international insurance protection in some sectors. Min-jae frowned slightly. What does that mean? Mr. Park answered. It means companies that refuse to upgrade their security systems may lose insurance protection. Min-jae's fingers tapped slowly on the armrest of his chair. Get to the point. Mr. Park hesitated. The point is that many companies we currently work with are switching their security systems to Johnson Dynamics. Silence filled the room. One of the younger advisors spoke nervously. They're offering predictive threat detection, biometric monitoring, and AI-controlled surveillance. Their system can detect internal fraud, hacking attempts, and physical security breaches. Min-jae stared at the screen. What does that have to do with us? Mr. Park sighed quietly. Our businesses operate in sensitive industries. Min Jae's eyes narrowed. Say it. Mr. Park lowered his voice. Her system flags unusual financial activity and potential criminal networks. The room went completely silent. One advisor swallowed nervously. If companies adopt her system, it could expose many underground operations. Min Jae stood up slowly. He walked toward the giant screen displaying Johnson Dynamics' global expansion. Everywhere he looked, her company was growing, expanding, becoming untouchable. And then Mr. Park delivered the worst news. There's another issue. Min Jae turned. What? Mr. Park tapped the screen again. A company policy document appeared. At the top was the Johnson Dynamics logo. Below it was a clearly written line. Security Ethics Policy. Johnson Dynamics does not provide services to organizations linked to criminal networks or illicit financial activity. Min Jae stared at the line. For a moment, no one in the room dared to speak. Finally, one of the advisors said quietly, "That means we can't access their system." Another added nervously, "And many companies that adopt her security will block partnerships with organizations that fail compliance checks." Min Jae slowly crossed his arms. The reality was becoming clear. Every corporation he attempted to partner with recently had rejected his investment offers. Banks refused certain financial transfers. Some investors suddenly stopped returning his calls. At first, he thought it was coincidence. Now he understood. Johnson Dynamics. Her technology was becoming the standard. And that standard was slowly pushing criminal operations out of legitimate business networks. Which meant his empire had encountered something it had never faced before. A wall. And that wall had a name. Amara Johnson. Min Jae walked toward the window, overlooking the city. The lights of Seoul shimmered below. He had built his empire through fear, influence, and money. But this kind of power was different. Amara wasn't attacking him. She wasn't threatening him. She wasn't even speaking about him. She was simply building something so powerful that it made people like him irrelevant. Behind him, one advisor spoke cautiously. "Sir, if her system continues spreading like this." He hesitated. "Our business operations may face increasing restrictions." Min Jae said nothing. His mind drifted back again to that rainy night 3 years ago. Her presentation, her quiet confidence, and his own mocking laugh. He remembered the exact moment he had said it. "No man wants a woman like you." Now the words echoed in his mind like a bitter reminder. Because the truth had become painfully clear. The world wanted exactly the kind of woman he had dismissed. Brilliant, focused, unbreakable. Min Jae exhaled slowly. For the first time in years, the powerful Mafia boss felt something he rarely allowed himself to feel. Consequences. Not from the police. Not from rival gangs. But from his own arrogance. Mr. Park spoke again. "Sir, what should we do?" Min Jae remained silent for a long moment. Then he turned around slowly. There was no anger in his eyes. No panic. Just deep thought. "Schedule a meeting." Mr. Park blinked. "With who?" Min Jae answered calmly. "Amara Johnson." The advisors exchanged surprised looks. "But sir, she already refused your investment." Min Jae picked up his coat. This time, his voice lowered. "I'm not going to talk about business." And as he walked toward the door, one quiet realization followed him. Power had finally met consequence. And the woman he once humiliated had become the one person powerful enough to change his future. Seoul was quieter at night. The rush of the day slowly faded into a calmer rhythm as the city lights reflected across the dark surface of the Han River. High above the streets, luxury restaurants and rooftop lounges glowed softly against the skyline. At the top of one of those buildings sat a quiet rooftop restaurant known only to the city's most powerful people. It was private, exclusive, and tonight, 2 people sat at a table near the edge of the terrace. A gentle breeze moved through the open space as the city stretched endlessly below them. Amara Johnson arrived first. She stood near the railing for a moment, looking out over the familiar skyline of Seoul. It had been a long time since she had last been in the city. 3 years ago, she had left in the rain after a meeting that could have destroyed her confidence. But instead, it had strengthened her. Now she stood here not as someone seeking opportunity, but as someone who created it. A waiter approached politely. "Would you like anything while you wait, Ms. Johnson?" "A glass of water is fine," she said calmly. A few minutes later, footsteps approached from behind. Amara didn't turn immediately. She already knew who it was. Calm Min-jae stepped onto the terrace. He had chosen this place carefully. No crowds. No reporters. No bodyguards hovering nearby. Just the quiet sound of the city below. For a moment, he simply stood there, watching her. 3 years had changed everything about their situation. Back then, she had come to him. Now, he had asked to meet her. Finally, Amara turned around. Their eyes met again. There was no hostility in her expression, but there was distance. Professional distance. Min-jae walked toward the table and stopped across from her. "Thank you for coming," he said. Amara nodded slightly. "You said it was important." They both sat down. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The waiter quietly placed 2 glasses of water on the table and stepped away. The silence between them was heavier than before. 3 years of history sat quietly between the 2 chairs. Min-jae looked out at the city lights before speaking. "You've changed the industry," he said. Amara shrugged lightly. "I improved it." "That's modest. It's accurate." Min-jae nodded slowly. He had spent years dealing with people who bragged about every small success. But Amara wasn't like that. She simply stated facts. No arrogance. No need to impress anyone. That confidence alone made her powerful. Min-jae folded his hands together on the table. "I won't waste your time," he said quietly. Amara waited. He took a breath, then finally said the words he had never expected to say in his life. "I owe you an apology." Amara's expression didn't change, but she listened. Min-jae continued. 3 years ago, you came to me with an idea." He looked down briefly. "And instead of listening, I insulted you." The memory felt heavier now. Much heavier than it had that night. "I judged you without knowing you," he admitted. "And I said something cruel." The rooftop was silent except for the distant sound of traffic far below. Amara looked at him carefully. "You did," she said calmly. Min-jae nodded. "I've spent a lot of time thinking about that moment." He leaned back slightly. "You know something strange?" Amara didn't answer. "If you had argued with me that night or shown anger, I probably would have forgotten about it." He paused. "But you didn't." He looked at her again. "You just walked away." Amara lifted her glass slowly and took a sip of water. Then she placed it back on the table. "That was the only thing worth doing," she replied. Min-jae studied her expression. "You weren't angry?" "Oh, I was angry," she said calmly. "But anger is temporary." He waited. "What matters is what you do after it." Min-jae leaned forward slightly. "And what did you do?" Amara looked out at the skyline again. "The same thing I was already planning to do." She turned back toward him. "I built my company." Min-jae nodded slowly. Then he asked something he had been wondering for weeks. "Did what I said motivate you?" Amara thought about the question carefully. Then she gave a small smile. "Do you know the strange thing?" Min-jae waited. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me." He blinked in surprise. Amara continued. "If you hadn't said those words, I might have believed them." Min-jae frowned slightly. "Believed what?" "That I needed someone like you to approve my ideas." Her voice was calm but firm. "But after that night, I realized something important." She leaned back in her chair. "I didn't need anyone's permission to succeed." The words landed quietly but powerfully. Min-jae felt their weight immediately. Because she was right. 3 years ago, she had been standing at the beginning of her journey. And he had treated her like she was insignificant. Now she stood among the most respected innovators in the world. Not because someone gave her power, but because she took control of her own path. Min-jae exhaled slowly. "I'm glad you proved me wrong." Amara tilted her head slightly. "I didn't prove you wrong." He looked confused. "I proved myself right." The city lights shimmered between them as silence returned to the table. Finally, Min-jae stood. Amara followed a moment later. There was no dramatic tension anymore. No anger. Just two people standing at very different places in life. Min-jae nodded respectfully. You've built something extraordinary, Ms. Johnson. Amara gave a small polite smile. Thank you. He hesitated for a second before speaking again. For what it's worth. She waited. I truly am sorry. Amara studied him quietly. Then she nodded once. I know. And with that, the conversation ended. They walked toward the elevator in silence. When the doors opened, Amara stepped inside. Min-jae remained outside. For a moment, they looked at each other one last time. Then the doors slowly closed. As Min-jae stood alone on the rooftop terrace, he looked out across the glowing city once again. For most of his life, he believed power meant controlling people. But tonight he had learned something different. True power was becoming someone no one could dismiss again. Years passed quietly. The world kept moving forward, just as it always did. Cities expanded. Technology advanced. New leaders rose while others slowly faded into the background. And somewhere within that changing world, two lives moved in very different directions. Amara Johnson's name had become known far beyond the tech industry. What began as a small startup had transformed into one of the most powerful security technology companies in the world. Johnson Dynamics now operated across continents.
Airports. Banks.
Government institutions. Major financial networks. Entire cities relied on the predictive security systems she had once tried to present inside a small casino meeting room. Her technology prevented cyberattacks, stopped financial fraud, and detected threats before they could harm thousands of people. But more than that, she had become something many young innovators admired. A symbol of resilience. Someone who refused to allow rejection to define her future. Magazines featured her on their covers. Universities invited her to give lectures. Young entrepreneurs studied her journey. Yet despite all of her success, Amara remained the same person she had always been. Focused. Grounded.
Calm.
She rarely spoke about the struggles behind her rise. And she never mentioned the moment that had quietly changed everything. Meanwhile, in Seoul, Kang Min-jae's world had slowly begun to shift. His empire still existed. His businesses were still powerful. But the man himself had changed. Not dramatically, not publicly, but quietly. Over time, Min-jae had stepped away from many of the darker operations that once defined his influence. Some of his casinos became legitimate luxury resorts. Some of his investments moved into legal industries. People around him noticed the difference. He was less aggressive, less interested in expanding through fear. Some believed he had simply grown older. Others believed the world was changing faster than he expected. But deep down, Min-jae knew the real reason. One evening, he sat alone in his private penthouse overlooking the city. The same city he once believed he completely controlled. A television played quietly in the background. A news program was broadcasting an international interview. On the screen appeared a familiar face. Amara Johnson. She sat across from a well-known journalist, calm and confident as always. The interviewer smiled. Ms. Johnson, your company now protects millions of people around the world. Many consider you one of the most influential leaders in modern security technology. Amara gave a modest smile. I just focus on solving problems. The interviewer continued. You've spoken before about overcoming obstacles early in your career. Amara nodded. Yes. What was the biggest lesson you learned during those early years? For a moment, Amara paused. She seemed to think carefully about the question. Then she smiled gently. Never let someone else decide your worth.
Her voice was calm.
But the message carried quiet strength. In the penthouse, Kang Min-jae slowly reached for the remote and muted the television. The room became silent. He leaned back in his chair and stared at the screen for a moment. Her words echoed in his mind. 3 years ago, he had been the one trying to decide her worth, judging her within seconds, dismissing her before she even had a chance to prove herself. Now the entire world knew her value, and he had learned something painfully simple. Respect was not something money could buy, not something power could force. It had to be earned. Min-jae stood up and walked toward the large window overlooking the city lights. The streets below looked just as they always had.
Busy. Alive.
Endless. Somewhere out there, millions of people moved through their lives without ever knowing the quiet moment that had changed his perspective forever. The moment inside a casino lounge. The quiet sound of a laptop closing. A woman standing up with dignity and walking away. And the cruel sentence he had spoken without thinking. No man wants a woman like you. Min-jae shook his head slightly. Not out of anger, but out of quiet reflection. Because life had a strange way of teaching lessons. Sometimes through success. Sometimes through failure. And sometimes through regret. Far across the world, Amara Johnson continued building the future she had once imagined. Protecting systems. Improving technology. Inspiring people who refused to let doubt stop them. She had long since moved beyond the insult that once tried to define her. But for Kang Min-jae, that moment remained a permanent memory. A reminder of the one person he had misjudged completely. The woman he once dismissed had become the one he respected most. And perhaps the most painful truth of all was this. She had proven him wrong, without ever needing him again. And in the quiet stillness of the night, Kang Min-jae finally understood something many powerful people learned too late. Some words cannot be taken back. Some opportunities never return. And sometimes, the greatest loss in life is not money, not power, but the person you failed to see clearly, until it was far too late.